So, my friends, first, thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Shantideva, for bringing us all together. It really is such an enormous blessing to have ways to stay connected, be in spiritual community, always, right? But when we're navigating crisis, when we're navigating enormous confusion, the blessing is bountiful. So thank you, heartfelt gratitude. And I'm particularly grateful that we have a place where we can talk through part of what has gotten stirred for many people, not for everybody, but for many people going through this crisis, which is a lot of anxiety. Yeah, a lot of anxiety. And in addition to all of the physical suffering many people are experiencing, and the economic suffering, I have enormous empathy for those who are in the grips of anxiety, because it can be so consuming, and it tends to be a full mind-body experience. So I'm really grateful that we've got a way to explore it and begin to think through together what causes anxiety, what its function is, and how we can work with it so that we're able to reduce it and suffer it less. So a good place to start is a question that comes up often, which is what is anxiety and how is it different from fear? Yeah. And like fear, anxiety tends to have a protective function. It's a strongly felt signal, both from the psyche and from the nervous system, that danger is lurking. But when it will manifest and how is unknown, which is why a situation like the COVID-19 crisis is a perfect setup for enormous amounts of anxiety, because to some extent, everybody is dealing with that sense of unknown threat, right? Yeah. So both fear and anxiety involve a psychological and a physiological response to feeling endangered. But unlike fear, which is a response to a known danger, anxiety involves always an unknown threat. But it's an unknown threat that tends to be laden with a lot of psychological and personal meaning. So there's always a subjective component with anxiety. And that's part of what differentiates it from fear. Not that we don't experience fear in very personal ways, of course we do, and we all have a personal relationship to fear. But with anxiety, it is that subjective component that tends to be the engine for its intensity. So another way of thinking about this is that fear, to some degree, it's a logical human reaction that's proportionate to the reality one has to face. So for instance, if we learn from the news that a tornado is coming our way, fear is the likely response. If we know we're going into a war zone, or if we know we're going to go help somebody who's in a situation where there's violence, chances are we're going to feel some fear, and we're going to need that physiological response as a way of readying ourselves for action. Yeah, and this is why fear, to some degree, is helpful. It prepares us to take action when we need to. Now, interestingly, anxiety also has a protective function. And I find that that's a helpful awareness so that we don't feel too badly about it. Often when we're very anxious, it can stir some embarrassment and even shame. But anxiety can also help us prepare. It can help us get ready for an experience that we are not sure about. It can help us feel more invested in an experience. Sometimes a little bit of anxiety can help us try to do our very best, which is why when we're getting ready for something that we genuinely care about, we tend to feel some anxiety. It's an indicator that we're invested, right? We're not too detached or too dispassionate. The question, though, is its quantitative presence, right? How much anxiety do we feel? How strong is it? And does it interrupt our lives or prevent us from living into experiences that are important to us? Does it cause us harm, or does it cause other people harm? So that's just a little bit of background to set up our discussion. And what I'm going to do now is talk about some of the psychological insights into anxiety, and then I'll shift into a Buddhist perspective of anxiety. And as I was preparing for our conversation tonight, I was contemplating some of the clinical writers whose work has been particularly meaningful to me. And I was rereading some of Karen Horney's work on anxiety. She was a wonderful German psychoanalyst who interestingly met D.T. Suzuki in 1950. And so she became one of the first psychoanalysts. She wasn't the very first, but she was, I would say, in that first wave of analysts to become very interested in the Buddha Dharma. And she wrote with enormous compassion about anxiety and her understanding of the various life experiences, the various dynamics that can contribute to it. And so I'll share with you a little bit of her perspective and insight. And she, along with her other analytic ancestors, wanted to suggest that the causes of anxiety are often unconscious. And this is very interesting because anxiety and the way we experience it physiologically is so strong. It's often very strong, sometimes really dreadful, that one would imagine they would be conscious of its cause. But more often than not, suggests Horney, and this rings true to me, and it slips below the level of conscious awareness. So we all have a conscious narrative about why we're anxious. So for instance, if we're anxious about intruders, if we live in New York City, probably we can find data to justify the anxiety. Or if we're anxious about bugs, we got a lot of data here in New York City to justify that anxiety, right? So there's often a conscious understanding of what's in the experience. But usually there are underlying factors that we can know more about. And the awareness of those unconscious factors often will radically reduce the intensity of the anxiety. It may not eliminate it completely, because I think we need more than insight, but the insight goes a long way toward reducing the suffering. And so Horney wanted to suggest that one of the main causes of anxiety are internalized conflicting beliefs or desires. Conflicting beliefs or desires. And in my clinical community, we tend to understand the psyche is composed of many parts, a real multiplicity. And it's very possible for different parts to have different needs and often conflicting needs. And it's this internalized conflict that sometimes is the engine for anxiety. So, for instance, some of the common conscious sources of anxiety could be heights, and by extension could be our mortality, right? There's a lot of death anxiety, which makes sense. And mortality is a complicated issue. But Horney writes very beautifully, and again with a lot of tenderness, a lot of compassion, that even with death anxiety, there are usually conflicting feelings. There may be the part we're conscious of that is aware of wanting to hold on to life, to do everything possible to hold on to it. But there may be another part that feels a pull toward death that's harder to get conscious of. We might have feelings, beliefs that fuel that part that are under wraps. She also suggested that frequently there are conflicting cultural messages that we have internalized that fuel a lot of anxiety. And I have been noticing that this seems to be so as we're navigating this current crisis. So for instance, she suggests that one conflicting cultural message, certainly in most Western cultures, is that we should be simultaneously neighborly, we should generate brotherly love, alongside a fierce competitive individualism. Yeah. And I have noticed that this is coming up for many people. There may be a part that longs to participate more. And there may even be fantasies of volunteering at COVID hospitals, really going into the trenches, facing into suffering directly. But then there's another part that is wondering if they can get that last bottle of disinfectant, if they can get the last thing of toilet paper at the Duane Reade before the next guy gets it. And there's tension. There's often a great deal of tension between these different parts that have, as I'm suggesting, very different needs. Yeah. So Horney wants to suggest that the excessive value placed on our individualism is a setup for chronic anxiety. And interestingly, in the Buddha Dharma, which I'll shift into in a few minutes, we come upon a resonant insight, right? That need to protect ourselves, the part that feels most invested in protecting ourselves, will frequently be in conflict with other parts that seek closeness with others, that seek feelings of connection, and that feel a longing to be more intimately connected. So she wants to suggest the healing process is to try to lift some of these unconscious conflicts to awareness. And as we're doing so, we can also just notice how we tend to protect ourselves from becoming more conscious of the anxiety. And this can be helpful. The first way we frequently get a little bit of distance from learning more about our anxiety is to rationalize it. Yeah. And it's easy to do when our circumstances are extreme. So typically people have been anxious about things like snakes and spiders and heights and flying. I'm wondering if for the foreseeable future, that's going to be replaced by the mail, the grocery store, right? The surface, right, that we're going to encounter before we've disinfected it, the laundromat. And again, the challenge with rationalizing the anxiety is it perpetuates it. So we have an opportunity just to notice if the anxiety we're suffering is acute, if it's causing us a lot of distress, and there's a part that wants to swoop in to gather evidence why it's justified, we can just notice that. And perhaps even stay with a rationalization to see if it has a protective function. The next form of defense against anxiety is denial. Yeah, denial. And this is interesting too. You may have noticed, especially earlier on in this situation, some people were extremely concerned and other people were conspicuously unconcerned. And that is interesting. It's sometimes denial, and we all need denial to some extent. It prevents us from directly accessing the truth of our anxiety, feeling it consciously, which would be an inroad to working it through. And then the next defense, and this is a defense that, again, most people have experienced, is to, in some way, narcotize it through drinking, through drugs, through Netflix, through sleep, through something that takes us out of the experience. And there's no shame in that, because again, that's a very human defense, to find whatever's readily available to get what feels like critically needed distance from an unbearable feeling. But it is important to simply stay curious about how we might be defending ourselves. And Carl Jung was helpful here because he suggested one thing we can do if we notice that we have what we might describe as a compulsive or an addictive protective defense. Rather than feeling badly about it, really go into the symptom. Be super curious about what it is that draws us. Is it Netflix? Is it chocolate cake? Is it beer? Whatever it is, to almost commune with it and ask it, what's your function in my life? Are you trying to protect me from something that I could become more aware of? Yeah. And then the last primary form of defense is to avoid all thoughts, feelings, impulses, and situations that might arouse the anxiety. And this is a very poignant defense because it's typically this defense that ends up restricting life. If we are feeling anxious about some component of life, it could be a creative endeavor, it could be a romantic endeavor, it could be a professional endeavor, but the thought of embarking on that experience mobilizes too much anxiety. It's understandable that we might try to simply stay away from those situations. But we can notice if the distancing efforts generates other forms of suffering. Yeah. So how do we heal psychologically, right? That's always the question when we're trying to understand the causes of our suffering. In psychotherapeutic work, the healing process usually involves a slow, patient endeavor where we seek to develop more flexible and less restrictive ways of working with our anxiety so that it doesn't have to interfere with our ability to enjoy our lives and to suffer less. So that's another way of saying, of course, we all do need protection, right? We all do need to find ways to generate feelings of safety, especially if we've been badly hurt and badly hurt by particular experiences. But the challenge is to find modes of protection that don't then generate a great deal of suffering. Yeah. And that is very possible. It's usually just a process of having those resources in place so that we can access them reliably. Okay, so now I'm gonna shift into the Buddha Dharma, and then we'll do a little practice before I open it up to hear your questions and your responses. So, what does the Dharma have to say about anxiety? Well, it says a lot, right? In the proverbial 84,000 teachings, there are quite a lot of teachings that circle around the experience of anxiety. But in short, what is suggested is that anxiety results from a basic, fundamental misperception of ourselves that leaves us feeling in some visceral way radically disconnected from others. Yeah, a fundamental misperception of the truth of who we are. So to just tease out that point, and I know many of you have been studying the Dharma for some time, so you're familiar with these teachings. When we imagine we're invested with unchanging qualities, right, that our very personhood is fixed in nature, we will start to feel fundamentally separate from others. And then typically we'll start to protect ourselves, and often with mounting feelings of anxiety and even paranoia. And we saw this right at the start of this crisis. I don't know if any of you went to your local health food store or your local grocery store at the very beginning. The panic was extreme, and as a result, the self-protective impulses were very extreme. What was needed was a sense that we've got resources that we'll share, and if we're really feeling connected, if the refrain that we're hearing now, that we're in this together, was something we felt in a visceral way, there would have been less panic shopping. There would have been a sense that, all right, we're going to be aware of who's in the store and who needs what, and we're going to divvy things up. But instead, as anxiety was mounting, so too was a feeling of separateness, that I have to look out for myself. I'm in this alone. It's a dog-eat-dog world. So in the Buddha Dharma, this is a form of egocentric concern or self-grasping. And it tends to generate a lot of agitation, and it tends to generate the full array of defenses that we have at our ready. But interestingly, if you check yet more deeply, what you find is an existential anxiety about not existing in the way we think we do. right? As we learn in the Buddha Dharma, everything about our nature is dynamic, is fluid, is impermanent, is in relationship to truly ever-changing causes and conditions. This is not conceptual. We're really feeling the truth of this now. And this anxiety it's a little different from death anxiety. It's a yet deeper anxiety about our groundlessness, the truly fluid, groundless nature of our existence, how dynamic we are. And some Buddhist clinicians, namely, there are a number, but namely Jack Engler, who's written some excellent, compelling pieces on Buddhist and psychological development, on being somebody and being nobody, and suggesting originally a certain developmental model around our spirituality, who then revisited that piece some years later, offered some really compelling insights that we defend against that deepest anxiety of our groundlessness by grasping on to a permanent sense of selfhood. That this is why we tend to feel too solid and therefore fundamentally separate from others. And Engler points out that in the Dharma, you don't find a discussion of why we grasp onto ourselves. What you find is a really ornate and extremely helpful exploration of the impact of self-grasping. But Engler wants to underscore that every defense is protective. Every defense has a function. So the self-grasping that we're aware of as a form of suffering, for many, is a needed defense against that deepest experience of anxiety. Yeah. And he would even suggest that it's a reaction formation against the truth of our groundlessness. And reaction formation it's a clinical term that means usually unconscious process where we're up against something that feels unbearably distressing, something that generates some unbearable, it's either an impulse or an attribute that generates unbearable anxiety or some other feeling, and then we turn it into the exact opposite. So we are truly groundless and fluid and dynamic. That stirs a lot of anxiety for most people. And so we transform that into a conscious sense of permanence. Yeah. But while it's an understandable defense, like all defenses, it's an imperfect one because it ends up creating other problems and other forms of suffering. It does defend us against this potentially freeing but very challenging reality. And then it generates the feelings of aloneness and disconnection that result from feeling more separate than we actually are. Yeah. So the remedy, the healing, in short, because it's often again a slow process, is to use our practice, to use our contemplative methods of meditation and study and reflection, to first notice the many layers of what we're feeling. Mindfulness is so helpful here, with as little judgment as possible. And then to begin to tap into a bolstered reflective capacity, an ability to observe more of our experience, to learn more about how we protect ourselves. And interestingly, in the Dharma, the methods of working with the breath, working with visualizations, help the body, help the nervous system start to feel more regulated. Because when we're anxious, there is usually a release of sympathetic energy from the autonomic nervous system. Sometimes if the anxiety is extremely powerful, we might feel that parasympathetic response of collapse or freezing. But when we work with the breath, we start to regulate these different parts of the nervous system. And so even if we're not conscious of what the underlying conflicting feelings and beliefs are, the body can start to feel better, can start to feel a little safer. And then slowly, slowly, the mind can follow. So before we shift to some practice, what's interesting when we practice the Buddha Dharma is we really do end up feeling into the truth that nothing about us exists outside of a relational context. Everything about us emerges out of interbeing. Our bodies come from the body of another. Our minds come from our minds being held in the mind of another before we know what a mind is. And as we discover that reality, it can be extraordinarily freeing, but it can also generate its own form of anxiety, especially if we have needed the defense against feeling intimately in relationship with others. Yeah. And so we use our practice to cultivate as much compassion for ourselves as possible, so that whatever it is that's in the mix of our very personal experience of anxiety, we're able to learn more about it, work with it, suffer it less, slowly, slowly begin to help others suffer it less, and then begin to swap out the anxiety for curiosity. Curiosity about our suffering, and even with a sense of friendliness. If we're feeling anxious, to be curious about that. Why today? Why am I feeling it strongly? And I've noticed this. It's some days during this crisis, it's strong for me, other days not so much. And it's interesting to notice that, investigate, learn more, and then watch the mind and the body start to recalibrate. So I think what I'll do is pause there and do some practice. Okay, and then after we do a little bit of practice, I'd love to hear from you, see how this is sounding, see how you've been working with your experience of anxiety. So one of the silver linings of working remotely is when we're practicing, we can really get comfy. So do whatever you need to do. You need to stretch out your legs, please do so. If your body is needing to just be as relaxed as possible, enjoy it. If you're feeling a little tired, and it's helpful to bring some energy into the body, you can just take a few moments to prop yourself up in any way that's helpful. Making whatever adjustments will allow you to usher in some increased ease and comfort. And if it's helpful, you can gently close your eyes. Or if you're accustomed to practicing with your eyes open, you can find a point 4 to 6 feet on the floor in front of you, and just have your lids nice and soft to allow some light in. And then taking a few moments to allow the cushions of the chair, the sofa, to completely support you. And to enjoy a feeling of decompression, release. And the breath can be easy and natural, spontaneous. And if you notice any ambient sounds, you can just allow them to wash over you. And as you're easing into a state of increased relaxation, wakefulness, I'll recite the refuge and bodhicitta prayers, which you can mentally repeat, or if you know them and you wish to join me, please do so. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the merits of giving and other virtuous deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the merits of giving and other virtuous deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the merits of giving and other virtuous deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. And now you can mentally repeat the recitation of the 4 immeasurables. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all never part from the happiness of no suffering. May all remain in equanimity, free from partiality, attachment, and aversion toward those near and far, for the benefit of all. And now at your own pace, as you bring your awareness to the breath, you can begin to take 3 or 4 deep, full inhalations, followed by a few moments of gentle breath holding, followed by a yet deeper, fuller exhalation. Really enjoying a sense of fullness on each inhalation and exhalation. Feeling the fullness of the belly as you hold the breath before exhaling. And then just allowing the breath to resume its own natural rhythm. Allowing it again to be completely spontaneous. As the breath becomes more subtle and the body begins to enter into a yet deeper state of relaxation, I invite you to evoke an experience that you have had that's stirred anxiety. And without feeling the intensity of sensations that may have come with this anxiety, you can first just call it to mind. It could be a current experience, something connected to this collective experience that we are in. Or it could be something from the past. Just call it to mind, noting the nature of this experience. And then beginning to notice where you feel the anxiety in the body. Noticing the strength of any sensations you become aware of. And Noticing if the sensations fluctuate when you bring some gentle awareness to it. You can check to see if the sensation moves to any other part of the body. And without any need to eliminate the sensation, you can gently breathe into it, perhaps offering a sense of increased spaciousness to hold and support the sensation. And as you're allowing yourself to access this increased sense of openness and spaciousness, to care for these sensations that you're holding in the body, you can check to see if there are any beliefs connected to this anxiety. Perhaps they are powerful, but also well hidden, possibly even beneath the physical sensations you've brought to awareness. With a sense of tenderness and friendly curiosity, you can just notice if there are some beliefs that come to mind. Beliefs that have fueled this experience of anxiety. And as you consider these beliefs that may have developed long ago, perhaps even before you were verbal, you can check to see if there are any feelings that have been awakened as you have brought these beliefs to awareness. Could be some feelings of vulnerability, sadness, tenderness. Whatever they might be, I invite you to simply allow them to come into your mind and your heart. As you evoke that deepest layer of mind that is available to help you hold them with gentleness, patience. with respect. This is your inner holding environment for what you have felt directly. The bodily sensations, the emotions, the beliefs. And as you're actively bearing witness, perhaps you can also generate some feelings of appreciation for yourself, for your experience, and for the ways you have come to offer yourself protection. Ways that can shift and change as your awareness continues to shift and change. And perhaps also setting the intention to bolster, to nurture this awareness, and to work with what you've become aware of with the deepest aspiration to unburden yourself from all forms of suffering. To live into especially those aspects of life that may feel fraught with potential difficulty or suffering. And to imagine yourself entering into these aspects of life with deepening sense of safety and ease. And lastly, as a way of nurturing any insight or clarity you may have experienced, you can dedicate your practice to all beings. Really imagine just offering them this time of contemplation, and grounding your own wish for well-being and the well-being of all of the precious human lives who compose this world. May we all be well. May we all be and feel cared for. May we all live with a sense of ease. Thank you so much, everyone, for your practice. And after you take a few moments to stretch, twist, do whatever is helpful, I'd love to hear from you if there are any questions or responses. And I may not be able to see you. So Sheila, if you see anyone raise their hand, can you unmute them? Or you can, if there's someone who'd like to speak, just shout out.
Hi, Pilar. Hi. Hi, I'm Judy Kramer, and
Hi, Judy.
I feel so much better. I had so much anxiety before the meditation, and I feel so much better from the meditation. I just want to thank you. It just brought a sense of safety and peace. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Judy. I'm so glad you're with us.
So much. And I hope to meet you again when this is over. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jan, I see your hand.
I just wanted to quickly note, did you see that, how the cats all came out during the meditation? I saw the cat come across these women right here, on this couple of women right here, their cat came up. And you see this, my little baby here?
Oh, sweet.
That's what happens when you meditate. The cats love it. They invented it.
That's true. The cats come out, and if you ever meditate out in nature, the rabbits come out, the animals, right? This is where they live.
Yes.
The sense of direct experience. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you.
And if there's anything that I touched on that you'd like to hear more about or could be clarified, welcome your questions, whatever they might be. And it looks like Helen may have raised her hand. Helen, are you there with us?
Can you unmute? Can she unmute?
Here.
Helen, maybe you can unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say that visualizing someplace you feel anxious was very good to stay with that for a little while and try to find some things further back that maybe some other feelings to figure that out. And that was really a helpful visualization to kind of learn something about, you know, myself. So I never did that, and it was very good. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. It is interesting. It can sometimes seem counterintuitive that entering into difficult experience more fully could help us feel better. But actually, that's what we find both in spiritual practice and in clinical work, that if the mind and the body is feeling safe enough, doesn't have to be perfectly safe, but safe enough, then we are able to more directly enter into sometimes very challenging feelings and experiences, but with a sense of support and an inner support, so that there's less threat of a psychic free fall. And that can help us learn more about it. So I'm glad it was helpful to you.
Yeah, I never, nobody ever, well, I never did a specifically psychotherapy meditation before. So, or psychotherapy, your technique, I never did this before. So I thought it was very, very, very helpful to combine, you know, that sense of comfort in a meditation, in a meditation state is kind of enlightening about yourself, about myself. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pamela's hand is up.
Great, thank you, Jim. Pamela, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Pilar. I had a question about, so I've practiced going, finding the anxiety, imagining the scene, going to the body to see where it is in my body. And then you asked us to look at the beliefs. And that's where I got a little bit, maybe because I'm accustomed to doing it differently, so I started questioning things and my mind started getting a little too involved. But that's where I got a little bit confused about, I just started thinking too much, and the beliefs weren't arising in a way that I felt was constructive or maybe as beneficial as they could be in the progress of the meditation. I just got back up in my head again. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what could happen there with beliefs, so that I'm not back into the discursive mind. I'm appreciating how it's manifesting in my body and staying with that in whatever way maybe is most beneficial from the meditation.
Sure. Thank you, Pamela. It's such a helpful question. It's interesting. There's so many ways to meditate. It's one of the great gifts of the Buddha Dharma is there's such a breadth of methodology. And one way to meditate, and we learn this in the gradual path or the Lam Rim, is that we can bring the discursive mind into relationship with a contemplative state, so that we get to garner the benefits of insight, but to do so while, again, the mind is feeling a little more spacious and maybe, not always, a little more centered. However, as you're alluding to, the discursive mind has a tendency to take on a life of its own. And this is why we also have concentration practices to help the mind find a place of rest and to become habituated to just being somewhere, whether it's working with a belief or working with an image. And sometimes that works very well, and sometimes it doesn't, which is okay. I have personally found that if I'm in the thick of something very consuming or complex, it's tempting for the discursive mind to proliferate. And I have noticed, even if I'm doing some lumbering practice that, as you're describing, the mind will just follow the beliefs, and then I might be replaying a therapy session from 30 years ago, and then I'm thinking about my mother, and on, right? So I'm just personal stuff, but we all have our own experience. And we can use our mindfulness when that's happening. We can either notice it and then gently, if we're able, bring the mind back to a slightly more spacious place, maybe just to work with the breath for a few minutes, or to work with a Buddha image or candle, until the mind is not feeling so pulled in multiple directions. And then lastly, I would say to be very flexible with yourself, because as a clinician, I appreciate sometimes we do need to follow what's arising. In the Buddha Dharma, we learn to not follow, not get too attached to all the arisings of the mind. And in this way, we can develop great and healing powers of concentration. But sometimes it's illuminating to let the mind go to an event, right? Or let the mind get full. Yeah. Does that help? Pamela, are you still there?
I'm here. That helps. Thank you.
Thanks, Pamela.
I have a question. Hi, Pilar.
Hi, I can't see who's speaking.
Okay, this is Chris Panzica from Nalanda. I know
Hi,
you.
Chris. Nice
Hi.
to hear your voice.
Yours too. Thank you for this. I have a question. I noticed when I was thinking about an anxious situation, something came up for me, and actually initially I wasn't even sure if I was feeling anxiety about it. And then later, when you use the word fraught, I realized it is this fraught situation, and I do have some worry about it. And then I did find some beliefs around what the outcome could be, or some concerns about the outcome, and I kind of, it helped me register that I am anxious about it. But so I noticed that the feeling of, it's very hard for me to even feel anxiety about that situation. I do have a sense of not wanting to think about it, not wanting to deal with it. So I was just curious if you could say anything about when you're not so aware somatically about the anxiety, how to be more sensitized, or any thoughts that you have.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chris. This is the very interesting thing about anxiety, that as compelling, as dreadful as it can be, so too we can disconnect from it, right? We can disconnect from our awareness of it. And frequently we're unconscious of our anxiety. And this is why it can be helpful to use our contemplative practice just to investigate, to learn more. And so sometimes the mind is not conscious of suffering anxiety, but we will notice that we tend to feel a lot of gripping in the solar plexus, or we grind our teeth, or the gut is clenched. So in this way, the body will help us understand that we're holding anxiety, that the mind might be defended against. So you can just check to see what's in your experience, right? It sounds like perhaps for you, this is a situation where the anxiety is not acute, but it's somewhat subtle. There's some worry about outcome.
Yes.
Yeah. And an adjective, a descriptor, helped you connect with it. So sometimes it's in the reflection, the mental reflection, that we become more conscious, and sometimes it's an awareness of what's happening somatically. And it's good just to notice what helps us more directly access the fuller truth of what we're feeling. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Great. Now, I'm also aware, obviously, that many people are feeling acute anxiety about COVID-19 and about our own health, about the health of loved ones. So if there's anything extremely topical that would be helpful to talk through, I welcome those questions or reflections too.
Hi,
Hi.
Pilar. It's Jacqueline.
Hi, Jacqueline.
Thank you. Thank you, Shanti Deva, for bringing you here too. It's really wonderful. Yeah, I guess I took that as my feeling of anxiety with my father, who is going to be 90 almost, and he's doing well. I mean, he just had a stroke last week, but he's better. But yeah, that anxiety that is there of losing my father. I have a brother and a sister, but they live farther away, so I'm really the one that takes care of him. So I was using that anxiety and trying to understand what's under it. Because I understand it's a protection, yet I know that I'm afraid to let go. I'm afraid to let go of the anxiety because I have to be on guard, because I'm going to be blindsided by something happening if I don't worry. Or it's not as much worry, it's just that anxiety that happens all the time. And I think I'm still searching for how to understand the anxiety, and I know how it manifests in my body and in my obsessive compulsive thinking. But I think, yeah, when you mentioned belief, that was really interesting, and I was trying to find my understanding of that belief, but I think I'm still trying to get under the anxiety, and maybe that's not right. I'm not sure if I'm looking in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And it's a very tender-hearted experience, right? To have an extremely vulnerable loved one. And so I can deeply appreciate the sense of vigilance that you might experience. Sometimes when anxiety is running high, it does generate a vigilant protector part that feels like it must stay on guard at all times. And sometimes it's helpful just to investigate what that part has internalized. So, for instance, not always, but sometimes there's a belief that if I'm not vigilant, the other shoe will drop. So if I'm not like the Buckingham Palace guard, if I let my guard down for a minute, the worst thing will happen. And if that's so, that's not always the case. But if that's so, we can make efforts to try to help that protector part feel somewhat unburdened. And this is work clinically that we do in the relational school of psychoanalysis, and also in internal family systems, Richard Schwartz's work, right? Where we just help those protectors in any way possible relieve some of the burden, especially of vigilance. And maybe if it's fueled by a belief, right, that will be helpful. And then offer some reassurance to the protector part that this is a difficult situation. You love your father, and it is very stirring, right, very activating to have a loved one who's really vulnerable. But to offer a gentle reality check to the protector part that you are staying engaged, you are attuned to the best of your ability to what's happening, and that there are times when your whole mind-body system needs some opportunity for decompression. And as you know, we can ask our protective parts if they are willing to rest a bit and not disappear, because I really do believe that all parts of us are valuable, all parts are needed. But more often than not, the protective parts, they tend to work too hard. And if they are saddled with beliefs about the need for vigilance lest something shocking happen, then they may need a lot of compassionate reassurance that it's relatively safe to have a rest. Again, not to ditch the job altogether, but to just offer, again, the mind, the heart, the body, some opportunity to recover. And sometimes when protector parts feel the care from other parts, and this happens in our spiritual practice when they feel cared for by our Buddha nature, by a witnessing part, then they start to feel that it's not on them alone to stand guard, that there are other parts able to enter into a difficult situation and offer care and support. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. We'll be sending blessings to you and to your dad.
Thank you. That's helpful. It is.
God. It looks like Joan has raised her hand. Joan, can you unmute your...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So one of the things that I have trouble with is looking at, I find that I go through the same track when I'm looking at underlying beliefs, that I think there has to be a way to sort of think differently, to approach some of these things in a different manner, that I've gone over some of the same issues, and I find that it's very difficult to think differently about some of these belief systems. And, you know, it's like if you have a conversation with somebody about an issue and then they bring up a whole different way of looking at something. And that's what I'm trying to figure out, is how are there sort of different stimuli or different paths to be able to look at these things differently rather than going down the track over and over again the same way.
Right, right. Thank you so much. And this is Joan?
Yeah.
Okay, great. It's an excellent question, because to some degree, this is something we all do. Whenever we're dealing with something that has been difficult and has offered entrenched difficulty and suffering, more often than not, the mind will find habituated ways to cope. respond. And Freud described this as an effort at mastery, where we're trying to find some way to garner some feeling of control. But as you describe, the more we lift that pattern and that experience to awareness, the more we become aware of the need to interrupt the patterns and to let in some new perspective, some new understanding. Which is why I would suggest we all need healing mentors. We need good enough spiritual teachers. Often it's helpful to have good enough clinical mentors, therapists, wise friends, people whose perspective can challenge our own, which might be destabilizing. It's not easy to genuinely let in a new perspective and let it change the mind. But as you describe, it can be extraordinarily helpful and freeing if we've been too tethered to a rigid narrative about why we're experiencing something, or a too limited understanding of why we're experiencing something. So in order for that to happen, we usually need a process of cultivating trust so that we're able to take in a new perspective. I have certainly had the experience with the mentors in my life where they're attempting to offer me a new insight or perspective, and my protector parts get mobilized immediately to say, no, I prefer my 45-year method of navigating this experience, and I don't wish to change it. There's understandable fear of giving up what's been available to us. And so we really do need to build trust with people that they have our best interest at heart, that they are not going to be coercive in enforcing their perspective, but are simply going to offer, right? The same way in the Buddha Dharma, we offer to our Buddhas, our Bodhisattvas, all of these gifts, that they're just going to offer the gift of a new perspective. And if there's enough trust, what can happen is we'll start to take it in so that it mixes, right? It mixes with the mind, it mixes with our beliefs, and something alchemical can happen. Those entrenched beliefs can start to shift, can get transformed. So I encourage everybody to keep seeking out. I mean, you're in a beautiful Sangha here, but keep seeking out your spiritual friends, your spiritual mentors, your clinical friends, your clinical mentors, so that there is the possibility to interrupt those habituated insights and enjoy, right, to enjoy a new perspective. Because new perspectives tend to be enlivening. If they are aligned with the truth, they will tend to be very enlivening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm seeing a message, a very kind message. Thank you. Another question.
Carolyn Jackson is asking.
Great. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi there. I noticed today my eye was twitching. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We did some practice this afternoon around fear, and as that was winding down, I noticed my eye was sort of like twitching, and I couldn't. It was almost as though something hadn't been dealt with. And so this evening, it was very useful to hear to put the two parts of your lecture or your talk about these things as we led into the meditation, because I was able to get a different perspective, just as you were saying, on some of what's been bothering me. And it doesn't seem to go away. It comes back and, over and over. About a little over a week ago, someone called me, a woman I had seen in the park 3 or 4 weeks ago, just about the time we were closing down. And she asked how I was doing, and I said I was fine, and how was she? And we had chatted. She has some immune issues, and she's been quite sick, and we had chatted for a while. And I noticed that she was very nervous about how we were sitting, so we moved to the opposite ends of the park bench. And all she could say, she has the virus, and all she could remember was that I was the only person that she had talked to. And it just, it was devastating to me, because I could tell that really what she was calling to find out was as if I gave it to her. And of course I haven't been sick. And so I was floored. I didn't know how to respond. I assured her I was okay, but it was clear to me that she wasn't okay. And for her, it could be quite, threatening, as much as for anybody, I guess, but more so because she's fragile. And I just, periodically, I can't shake it. I think I've dealt with it. I know that, you go, oh, you're just your old careless self. You're too inclined to be casual. You didn't react quickly enough when she told you whatever. And it doesn't really matter whether you gave it to her or not. She thinks that. And, I just go through all this craziness, really, about acquitting myself in some way. And it's been very painful. And I tried to we have a mutual friend, and I reached out to that person and said I'd have this conversation and I'd like to speak to her again. I just wanted to see how she was doing, and that person didn't respond. And so I'm just sitting with it. And I think I've settled it, and then it comes up again.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carolyn.
Thank you for listening.
Absolutely. I can imagine how distressing that experience would be, and how activating, right? Because when we are feeling and being blamed, it will usually trigger any internalized, especially critical beliefs about oneself. It's very tough to stay in a relatively undefended place. And I feel for you. I'm imagining that your friend is in a state of acute distress, and she might be struggling to just ride those waves of distress. And again, this is an example, at least as far as I am imagining and understanding, of efforts at control, right? It's the effort to find out, and unless she's an epidemiologist or she's doing the tracing work, probably it's some unconscious effort at feeling more in control. And this is something we often do when we are overwhelmingly anxious. We try to find someone who's to blame. someone who's responsible for our suffering. And interestingly, as we've talked about at All Souls and Shantideva's work on patience, this is really one of the central themes of those chapters is we really have to slow things down, because the mind can start to distort the truth very easily when we are seeking to find someone to blame. So I'm feeling compassion for you, having been through this experience. And I have a hunch that you're working it through. It sounds like you are consciously trying to work it through. And you're noticing what it stirred. And then as time goes on, you'll notice too the perhaps decreased intensity of what it's stirring. I have a hunch that all of the difficult feelings will start to settle for you and hopefully for your friend.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn.
I just, you know, I'm so aware that every time I think they're settled, I guess that's the way you work them through, right? That they come up again.
They do. Yeah, the mind is a truly dynamic place.
Right. Say that again.
Yeah, it's truly dynamic, which is why, I mean, this is a very fresh experience for you, right? So it makes sense that it'd be right on the surface of the mind, and it would bubble up pretty frequently. This also happens from experiences that have happened long ago, where they, you know, the feelings about them suddenly bubble up.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, that's the psyche's push for healing. It's the psyche saying, look, there's something here. Let's feel it. It may not be easy, but let's try to lift it to awareness and see if there's anything that we can do to feel unburdened, feel freed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we saw.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand with just audio. Do we have time for another question?
We do.
Okay. I was thinking about this fear and anxiety, and I've had several situations in the last couple of days, including today. And it's also going to happen next week. And it's a work situation where I'm being asked to potentially put myself and others at risk for a very unnecessary situation. So that causes me anxiety. I guess I'm finding it difficult to figure out what's fear and what's anxiety. And it's a repeated thing. So I guess as I'm facing the weekend, I'm wondering how to work with this so that the protector part isn't constantly vigilant and I won't get a break this weekend.
Yeah. Sunita, is this you?
Oh yes, I'm sorry, yes.
That's okay, I'm hearing you, I can't see you. Thank you so much, Sunita. It's possible that there's a combination of fear and anxiety in your experience, because you are being asked to do something that does come with danger, right? So the natural response is some fear. But you're noticing that there might be a way to navigate this, especially in the next few days, so that you're suffering less. And I would imagine that there's also anxiety here, perhaps around what will happen if you declaratively state the terms. And you'll check with yourself to see what rings true. But I could imagine that there might be some anxiety around declaratively telling someone, no, it's not going to work.
Right. That's true. And I've already started doing that, but it's going to keep happening. So,
yeah. And so there might be anxiety around having to amplify the boundary, to amplify the no.
Mhm.
Right. And many of us, especially for those of us who have not felt or been sufficiently heard, it can trigger enormous anxiety when we have to set a clear boundary when other people are trying to cross it. Because it sounds like you're being pushed right over a boundary that you need for your own sense of safety and well-being.
Right.
And one thing you can do is when you feel it, and especially over the weekend, to know that it's okay to not have to stay with this experience mentally at all times in preparation for the next interaction. This can happen when anxiety starts to intensify, right? The protector parts also get mobilized. And so you can speak to your protectors just to ask them to give you a break until you actually have to have that conversation. And to reassure them that you will set the boundary, and if you need to tell them that you will not be available to do what you're being asked to do, that you're willing to do that. And it might, sorry, Sunita, go ahead.
No, I just said thank you so much.
Thank you. And this is a situation that's happening quite a bit, and actually it was happening before there was a broader awareness of the gravity of the situation, where many of us were being asked to go into public spaces or simply to do things that we were not comfortable with. And so this has generated a lot of fear and anxiety around boundary setting, and also telling people that we're not available when they would like us to be, which can be challenging. So perhaps another question, and then we'll do just a few minutes of practice before we wind down for the evening. Pamela is saying good night. Good night, dear Pamela.
Hi, Dr. Jennings, just one thing. Thank you so much. Would you mind telling us the names of those authors again?
Is this Elliot?
Yes, sorry.
Hi, Elliot. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah.
Sure. So the first author I mentioned is Karen Horney, and she's written several excellent books: Neurosis and Human Growth, Inner Conflicts, Self-Analysis. And she also has some beautiful writing on her meetings with D.T. Suzuki and how she began to cultivate wholeheartedness, what she was thinking of as wholeheartedness and clinical work. The other author I mentioned is Jack Engler, E-N-G-L-E-R. And he has several wonderful pieces. The chapter that I was referencing was in Jeremy Safran's anthology, Psychoanalysis in Buddhism. That came out in 2003, on being somebody and being nobody, something along those lines. Was there anyone else that I mentioned? Was there a third? If not, Karen Horney and Jack Engler are two people I think you'll enjoy. And I mentioned Richard Schwartz, his work on internal family systems. And if you're interested in reading about that from a relational perspective, Philip Bromberg's work is excellent. His books, Standing in the Spaces or In the Shadow of the Tsunami, really wonderful. Helen, it looks like you have a hand up.
How do you spell Karen Horney's name?
Horney.
Okay. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
I'm sorry, who was the author of In the Shadow of the Tsunami?
Philip Bromberg. Yeah, Bromberg. One of the founding theorists of the relational psychoanalytic school. And if you're finding this conversation between psychotherapy and Buddhism interesting, especially around this issue of anxiety, Harry Stack Sullivan's work, I also highly recommend. He was one of the founders of the interpersonalist school. And interestingly, he had some very similar insights to Engler. He said, self is basically an anti-anxiety system. So he was another clinician like Horney who had a real feel for the Dharma. They were interpreting it through clinical perspectives, but these perspectives are so resonant. This can be very interesting to investigate. So, is there another question? And Jacqueline?
I hope you don't mind. I just wanted to ask the fourth point that you made after Jung, you were talking about Jung.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went into the last point, which I didn't really get what you were mentioning for the last point. You know what I'm referring to?
So we were talking about the different ways of defending against anxiety, and so that, yeah, the third defense was to narcotize anxiety, and Jung was saying go into the symptom, go into the protective compulsive behavior. The fourth defense was to avoid all thoughts, feelings, impulses, or situations that might arouse the anxiety.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Pilar. On what you just said, is it ever helpful to stay away from the thoughts of the anxiety and not see it as something that is an avoidance?
Could you give an example?
Let's say you lean towards a particular type of anxiety, and you through your practices, etc., feel like you kind of get it and you can stop it, look at it, observe it, and then realize this isn't good for me.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when it comes around again, maybe you don't engage it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes. And tell me your name.
Maureen.
Maureen. Hi, Maureen. Yeah, thank you. So it can be interesting to notice the difference between reflection and rumination. and to notice also the different qualities that come with these contrasting experiences. When we're feeling more reflective, then there will typically be a sense of roominess around the content of the reflection. In the same way, or in a similar way, we may have felt some roominess when we were meditating together. When we're ruminating, more often than not, it starts to feel a little obsessive. The mind starts to feel contracted, and the mind can start to feel tethered to what we're turning over. And I think that's what you're alluding to, that when we're in that ruminative or obsessive state, we might need some help. And I'm all for being very flexible, right? So if it's happening, it's ultimately okay. But if it's causing us suffering, we might need a way to shift, right? To shift our mental state into a place of increased ease, get a little bit of wiggle room from the content. And so we can offer some containment, right? So the mind needs to be spacious and roomy, but it also needs to feel contained and supported. And the problem with obsessive thinking is that it proliferates. It can become all pervasive. So we can find gentle, non-shaming ways of speaking directly to the part that's generating the rumination and just say, I get it. For instance, I get it. The situation has really been unbearable or has overwhelmed me. I'm not getting any relief from it. And so you're circulating the content again and again, but I have a hunch it may not be helping you work it through. So we're going to try to actually work things through, but I also want to help you get some rest. And sometimes that can just set a gentle boundary and offer some containment. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I see that we are going to be winding down soon. Unless, is there a hand up that I can't see? Okay. So I want to perhaps just close by wishing us all, sending blessings to us all, that we will be exquisitely patient with ourselves as we're navigating the anxiety that gets stirred during this time, and that we will generate patience for others who are feeling anxiety, and that slowly we will allow any experiences of anxiety to begin to illuminate some underlying causes of suffering, with the intention of working them through, with the intention of feeling unburdened, feeling freed up. And I want to express to all of you my enormous gratitude for your presence and for your efforts to work through a time that I think has been extraordinarily challenging, mind-bendingly so. You give me needed inspiration to keep working with the beautiful teachings of the Buddha Dharma. and to cultivate the determination that we need to understand whatever causes our suffering and the suffering of others, with the aspiration to reduce it and ultimately end it for the benefit of all. So thank you, Sheila, for bringing us all together. Thank you, Shantideva, for creating the Sangha. And I hope to see you all again before too long. Thank you so much, everyone.